This is the lecture I gave at the International Conference on Interactive Digital Storytelling at Copenhagen on December 3rd, 2015. People have been talking about using computers to tell stories for many, many years. Back in the 70s, we had the work of Roger Schank, and we had the Tailspin program. In the 80s, we saw a number of interesting experiments, but the most important development was Brenda Laurel's thesis on interactive storytelling. In the 90s, we saw the first genuine projects on the subject, including the Oz project and the Erasmatron. But in this century, we have seen an explosion of interest in the subject, with hundreds of people coming into the field, hundreds of academic papers published, a mountain of very clever ideas, conferences every year. It has really been an active field of research. And yet, despite all of this effort, there's only one piece of software that we can all agree comprises genuine interactive storytelling, and that's Facade by Michael Mateus and Andrew Stern. And the disappointing thing is that Facade was a dead end. It was a carefully handcrafted piece of software that it didn't lend itself to a sequel or further developments along those lines. So I think the first thing we must do is admit to ourselves the magnitude of this problem. Interactive storytelling is a really, really hard puzzle, and it's going to take a lot of effort to solve it. So we need to look hard at the reasons why it's so hard. And I think the most important reason for the difficulties we have is the two cultures problem, first enunciated by C.P. Snow more than 50 years ago. He pointed out that the Western intellectual tradition was bifurcating into two mutually antagonistic subcultures, an arts and humanities subculture and a science and technology subculture. And he warned us that the antagonism between these different subcultures was a dangerous development because science and technology give us vast power, but we need the arts and humanities to teach us how to use that power effectively. Now, the reason for this divide is not some mere social or sociological problem. We won't solve it by merely rearranging departmental structures in universities. No, it's much more profound than that. It has to do with the way these two subcultures think. Artists think in terms of patterns, and technologists think in terms of rigorous logic. And each side has developed and refined its style of thinking over hundreds or even thousands of years and refined them to a point of extreme sophistication. And as these things have developed, they have diverged further and further apart. So the two sides simply cannot understand each other. Now, some people have suggested that the solution to this problem is simply to put artists and technologists together on one big team. We'll all work together like one big happy family, and together we'll solve the problem. There have been a lot of such efforts, and they've all failed. The reason being that you can't simply put two top people from completely different fields together and expect them to produce better results than they can get individually. It doesn't work that way. Another way of illustrating this problem is a movie clip from the movie All of Me about 30 years ago. In this movie, the protagonist is accidentally hit on the head with a pot containing the soul of a woman who's just died, and somehow her mind is magically transferred inside his. And she ends up controlling one side of his body, and he controls the other. So to even walk, they must cooperate, and the end result looks like this.
Please, just do as I say.
How many teams have you been on that functioned about this way? No, what we really need to do is combine the talents of artist and technologist inside a single mind. But I haven't seen much progress there, and I begin to fear that we really won't see significant progress in this direction until we get dramatic advances in human genetic engineering. Nevertheless, in the meantime, there are some things we can do to ameliorate the problem. The first of these is to learn from the artists. These people have been developing their craft for more than 2,000 years. They really know what they're doing here. I mean, this is Aristotle, and 2,000 years ago, he wrote this book, The Poetics, which lays out the fundamentals of storytelling. We need to read that. Another thing we need to do is modify our terminology. Our terminology is entirely too techy. For example, we have algorithms inside our programs that mimic the behavior of people, and we call these algorithms agents. But artists call them characters. We have objects, which are three-dimensional things with weight and mass and color and shape and so forth. The storytellers call that a prop. And then, of course, we have locations, X, Y, Z coordinates in three-dimensional space. Artists use stages, a completely different concept. I'd like to expand on this, the spatial obsession of technologists. They're just really locked into the idea of spatial reasoning. This goes all the way back to the very first computer game, Space War, in which you maneuvered your spaceships around a two-dimensional space, shooting at each other. This is not at all the way stories work, and to demonstrate that, let's go back to the movie Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope, and let's trace the movements of Luke Skywalker on the planet Tatooine. We first meet Luke at his uncle's moisture farm, where they purchase R2-D2 and C-3PO. But then R2-D2 runs away, and so Luke goes chasing after him, and poof, next thing you know, he catches up with R2-D2 in the canyon, where he's attacked by the Sand People. But fortunately, he's saved by Obi-Wan Kenobi, who takes him to, poof, his house, where they talk things over, and Obi-Wan says that they have to go to Alderaan. They set off, and poof, the next thing you know, they're at the scene where the Imperial stormtroopers slaughtered all the Jawas. Luke realizes that the stormtroopers may have gone to his uncle's farm, and so he races to his uncle's farm where, poof, he gets there and realizes that his aunt and uncle have been murdered. Therefore, poof, he reappears at the site of the Jawa massacre and agrees to go to Mos Eisley, and so, poof, next thing you know, there they are in Mos Eisley. So we have 5 stages here, and there is no specified spatial relationship between the stages. They could be laid out like this, or maybe like this, or even like this. We don't care. It just doesn't matter as far as the story is concerned. There's a lesson here. Lose the spatial reasoning. It doesn't belong in stories. Now I'd like to get specific, talking about 5 primary technical challenges that we must beat in order to get interactive storytelling working. 5 dragons that we must slay to achieve our goal. And the first and easiest of these is using faces with emotions. We have a beautiful case example here in 2 of the very first all CGI movies that came out about 14 years ago. The first, Final Fantasy, was done by technologists. The second, Shrek, was done by artists. Now, the technologists who built Final Fantasy pushed the technology to its absolute limits. They boasted that the protagonist in this story, the facial model for her head, had 30,000 separate hairs. Isn't that impressive? By contrast, Shrek was bald. And as you can see, the modeling of his face was not at all photorealistic. I mean, compare that with this face from Final Fantasy. This is a magnificent piece of CGI. But there is one little problem with it. It's dead. There's no life in this face, no feeling. It's just dull and blank. By contrast, the faces in Shrek are alive with emotion. They explode with feeling. And the final result of that difference can be easily enough seen in the final sales figures. Final Fantasy cost $137 million to build, and it generated sales of $85 million, which means it lost a great deal of money. By contrast, Shrek cost a mere $50 million to build, but generated sales of $492 million. But that was just the beginning, because then there were 4 sequel movies generating $3.5 billion in sales, and then, of course, 3 TV specials, 2 short films, 1 theme park attraction, 12 video games, and countless toys, all generating billions and billions of dollars in revenue. There's a lesson here for technologists, and they better learn it. This is the wrong way to think about the human face. This is the right way to think about the human face in terms of emotional expression, not anatomy. This is the wrong way to model and edit a face. This is a much better way because it focuses on emotional expression. Now, this is pretty crummy. This is something I slapped together in a few months. And it's not at all original. It's actually based on ideas that Susan Brennan first developed more than 30 years ago. And there have been a number of other attempts along these lines. But the sad fact is, nowhere near as much effort has been put into this kind of thing as into the photorealistic thing. Next big problem, personality models. There are a lot of misconceptions about personality models. The dumbest is the notion that a personality model should somehow describe its characters. We don't care about what a character is. A personality model should be operational in nature. It should concentrate on what a character does, not what a character is. The game designers have known this for decades. For example, back in the 70s, the role-playing game Dungeons & Dragons had a simple personality model with just 6 personality traits, and yet they were all used to calculate the results of behavior. For example, strength was used to determine whether you could win in a fight. Constitution was used to determine how long you could keep on fighting even after taking injury. Dexterity was used to figure out how well you could handle tricky manual tasks. So let's move on to another fundamental requirement about those traits, and that is that they be orthogonal. That's a mathematical term which means mathematically independent of each other. Think in terms of analogy with the red, green, blue color model that we use with computers. Those 3 colors are orthogonal. Red has absolutely no blue and no green, and blue has no red and no green, and so forth. Whereas the colors on the right side of this slide are not orthogonal because they each contain mixtures of colors that some of the other circles contain. That's a bad model. The reason why orthogonality is important has to do with the way you use a model. You use it to write algorithms to control behavior. And so when you're working on an algorithm and you turn to your toolkit, your personality model, you don't want to face a whole bunch of very similar personality traits because then you spend all your time worrying about which is the best one to use. An ideal toolkit for building these algorithms has just a few tools that are simple and straightforward, and it is obvious which tool to use in any given situation. Here's another requirement for a good personality model. The traits must be appropriate to the story world. For example, suppose you're doing a Charlie Brown story world. You might want to have a trait for self-assured because obviously Lucy is very self-assured and Charlie Brown is always doubting himself. On the other hand, you would not want to have a trait called sexy because there's no sexual behavior in a Charlie Brown story world. So make sure your personality traits zero in on the important action in a story world. Now, the psychologists have been working on personality models for many years, and they have developed an excellent one called the Big Five personality model. Hundreds of papers have been published on this model. They have accumulated mountains of data about how it works and what it means. And so a lot of people working on interactive storytelling think, well, let's just use the Big Five model. That's a bad mistake, because that model describes real people, and real people are boring. There are no real people in stories. There are only characters. I mean, seriously, how many real, normal, typical people do you know who would have chosen the red pill? Now, I've worked on personality models for decades, and I've come up with a whole bunch of variations, but the one I've boiled it down to is very simple. It has just 3 traits, but some interesting extensions to those traits. Each trait is measured on a bell curve with extremes at -1 and +1, and 0 representing an average or typical character. Thus, for the good-bad variable, we can see that Princess Leia is obviously very good, and Darth Vader is very bad, and C-3PO, well, he's sort of average. In the movie Matrix, the Oracle is extremely honest, and the traitor is obviously very dishonest. In the movie The Hobbit, Oakenshield is pretty domineering, whereas Bilbo Baggins, well, he's not completely submissive, but he's definitely on the submissive end of the scale. Now, there are a number of extensions to this personality model that I won't go into except for one, and that's the distinction between an intrinsic value and a perceived value. The intrinsic value is what you really are. The perceived value is what other people perceive you to be. For example, let's take me. Let's suppose I have an honest value of plus 0.3. That's all well and good, but there are other people in the world, and they don't know who I really am. All they know is what they've learned from their experiences with me, and so they're going to have different perceptions of how honest I am. We call those perceptions the p-values, the perceived values, or in shorthand, we can just call this trust. Now we come to the big mean one, language. Language is necessary for interactive storytelling, but it's extremely difficult to do. And so a number of people have tried to come up with sneaky ways to do storytelling without any language, and that has never worked. To illustrate why, I'd like to show you another movie clip. Only there's a catch this time. I'm going to leave out the sound, the language. So you get this clip with no language. Are you ready? Here goes. Wow. Fascinating, huh? Okay, what do you say we watch the same clip all over again with the language put back in, okay? Here it is.
He told me you killed him. No. I am your father.
Oh, no! Okay, so obviously, we've got to put language into the computer if we're going to do interactive storytelling, but everybody knows that that's impossible. And I have a way of explaining the impossibility of it, which suggests a possible solution. And that is to note that language mirrors reality. It echoes reality that we perceive. Thus, people who live in the Arctic, their languages have all kinds of different ways of talking about frozen water, because it's a major part of their reality. Whereas people who live in the desert, well, their languages don't have any way to talk about frozen water because it's not part of their reality. So, if we want to put language inside the computer, we're going to have to put reality inside the computer. And that's going to be a bit of a problem because, you know, reality is kind of big. I mean, can you conceive of how you would go about creating a data structure for reality? I sure can't. But the games people have come up with a trick they've been using from day one, and that is that they reduce reality to a toy reality. They greatly simplify reality, strip away the details, and reduce it down to just what is necessary to play the game. And that's what we have to do. And in fact, that's what stories always do. I mean, seriously, real normal people, we have to go to the bathroom every now and then, right? Okay, when was the last time you saw a character in a story going to the bathroom? It's not dramatically significant, so we strip it out. And in fact, this is what all art does. Art is about stripping away reality, distorting reality, taking away everything except the message that the artist wants to communicate. So, we're going to have to put language and reality into our computer, but it is crucial to realize that language and reality are intertwined. You can't build them separately. You can't go off and build a language and then say, okay, let's make a reality to fit this language. You can't design a toy reality and then say, okay, let's make a toy language to fit this toy reality. That doesn't work. You have to undergo a profound conceptual shift where you think of language and reality as a single concept, relanguity perhaps. That's the biggest change we have to make in order to do language in interactive storytelling. Now, my technology for this is something called Dicto. Some people have called Dicto a meta language. It isn't that at all. It's really a way of designing a complete reality simultaneously with the language that is part of that reality. I will not go into the many technical details of Dicto here. I'll just show you some of its output. Here's one form of output in which two characters are speaking to each other using an iconic language, but Dicto is not tied to icons at all. Here's some text output from Dicto. It can put out text, and it even has a scripting language that allows you to customize the text to any particular situation. Okay, next dragon to slay is the narrative engine, which is really just a way of mechanizing the subtle process of telling a story, reducing it to gears and levers and wheels. Now, there have been a lot of interesting efforts in this direction. My own approach is very simple-minded. I start off by observing that a story is a sequence of logically connected, dramatically significant events. And then I make a diagram for a story where an event is shown by a circle and the logical connection is shown by an arrow. Whoop-de-doo, high tech, huh? Okay, so in my drawing approach, interactivity is just a branch where you come to a node and you can take either choice A or choice B. So if you want to combine interactivity with a story, you put them together and you get, ta-da, a tree. And you'll note that a single passage through the tree constitutes a story. There is nothing original about this idea. People have been perfectly aware of this for many decades. And what people have also learned is that trees explode exponentially. As you try to make a tree bigger, the number of nodes grows exponentially, and you very quickly reach a situation where the tree requires far more nodes than you can possibly build. Now, people have been trying to come up with kludges to get around this problem for many, many years. There have been a number of kludges developed, and to show you how old these ideas are, one of the first kludges was first publicly demonstrated at the 1967 World's Fair in Canada, where a Czechoslovakian crew did an interactive movie involving two projectors. They would pause the movie at a certain point and then ask the audience, what should we do? Should they do A or B? And then based on the vote of the audience, they would show the right projector. And so the audience gets real choice. We can either do this or we can do that. Oh, isn't this great interactivity? Except, of course, no matter what choice they make, the narrative flow folds back to a single result. I call this trick foldback, and it is fraudulent interactivity. You get to make a choice, but your choice is meaningless. It's a cheat, and it doesn't take players very long to realize they've been cheated. Here's another kludge, very common in the games industry. What we're going to do here is we're not going to even try to do interactive storytelling. We're going to alternate a story that's not interactive with a game that is interactive. So we'll tell you a little dramatic story, and then do some interactive game, and then more story and more game and more story and interactive and story and interactive story, interactive, and if you do it fast enough, it's interactive story, right? Wrong. No, this doesn't work. It never works. It is not interactive storytelling. But it is the standard technique used by games people. What they do is they build a game and then they tack a story onto it. And it's a kludge, not a solution. Here's another kludge. I call it kill 'em if they stray. The idea here is we're going to give you lots of choices, but only one of the choices you face at any given juncture is the correct choice. And if you do not choose the correct choice, you die. Again, this is a very old technique. We saw it, for example, in the world's first video disc game, Dragon's Lair. This was in 1983. And basically it killed you for a million different reasons. Here's a little video clip I found on the internet of some of the many ways that it could kill you. So these games always work just by killing you a lot. Thus, we have these kludges. There are a couple of other minor ones, and none of them work, and we have been failing with them for decades, and yet people still keep trying to use them. Or more often what they do is they take a little bit of this kludge and some of that kludge and a tiny amount of this kludge, and they mix them together, hoping that somehow the result will not be a kludge. And guess what? It never works. Okay, my approach to it can be best visualized by thinking in terms of a tree with, some foldback and so forth, and noting that the narrative flow in a tree is always downward. And it occurred to me, golly gee, what if we had some of the narrative flow loop back upwards again? And of course, any idiot can look at this and say, yeah, right. Who wants to marry the frog over and over and over again? That's no fun. And that's true, but bear with me here. What if we took this concept and expanded it enormously? We would get something like this. It's called a directed graph. And I think you'll agree that a structure like this has billions and billions of different pathways. And of course, you can still say, great, fine. What's so fun about coming back to the same node over and over and over again? Well, the trick is to put context into it. And that is exactly what the creators of Pac-Man did with this particular directed graph. They added two elements of context. The first were the locations of the ghost. You would come to a node and there's a ghost on your left, so you run to your right. A little later on, you come back to exactly the same node, but this time there's a ghost on your right, so you run to your left. Exact same node, but different situation, resulting in a different decision. The other contextual element they added was the record of the dots eaten. You had to eat all the dots on the screen, which meant you had to strategize about how to get to the right corner of the screen. Now, what we're going to do to get a narrative engine is abstract these ideas from Pac-Man. We're going to abstract the spatial relationships, that is, between the ghosts and the player, to emotional relationships among all the characters. Then we abstract the idea of record of dots eaten to a record of all the events that have taken place. Now, our biggest abstraction is transforming a spatial node, which is simply a location on a two-dimensional space, into an event. And an event is a much more complicated structure. It's really a sentence with a subject, a verb, and an object. But if you look at the sentence, you'll realize that the subject and the object are pretty easily interchangeable. I mean, we could have the princess marrying the frog, or for that matter, the princess could marry the prince. Or maybe she could marry the countess. It really doesn't matter that much. What's important about an event is the verb. That's the really defining characteristic of an event. And so the verbs are what we're going to focus on for our nodes. Now, what we'll do is abstract those verbs. One kind of abstraction is generalization. We take a number of specific verbs and reduce them to a more general verb. But there's another even more powerful way. Let's imagine a verb called kiss. You might think, oh gosh, how many times can you kiss somebody in a story without it getting boring? But let me show you how you can do that. Let's suppose we've got a standard romance story. Boy meets girl, takes her out on a date. At the end of the date, the boy kisses the girl shyly. We go through the story a bit longer, and later in the story, they fall in love and they kiss romantically. And the story continues on through all sorts of other episodes, and they've fallen deeply in love and they kiss passionately. But then there's a war. He's drafted. He has to go marching off to war, and they say goodbye and kiss sadly. But then he comes home safe and sound. She runs and leaps into his arms, and they kiss joyously. So they get married, they have kids, and one night he goes into the child's bedroom and kisses his baby son fondly. One verb, 6 different kisses. They're all different because they are adverbially modified. That's one of the other tricks we can do to extend the power of a verb node. So here's what we do to abstract the concepts of Pac-Man to get a narrative engine. We start with the same kind of directed graph that Pac-Man uses, except instead of having spatial nodes, we have nodes that are verbs. Instead of having the locations of the ghosts, we have the relationships among the characters, how much they like each other or trust each other. And instead of a record of the dots that have been eaten, we keep a history of the events that have taken place. Now, here's a sample directed graph from the game we're working on right now. This is an obsolete version, but it gives you an idea of what these directed graphs can actually look like. They don't have to be humongous. This is just a part of the game. It's what we call a verb cluster. They tend to cluster together in groups. Last, dragon to slay, development environment. You can't write software without a development environment. And sure enough, we have one. It's called SWAT. It's big, it's powerful, it's complicated. And I won't go into any of the horrifying details of SWAT. I'll just point out a few cute things. For example, if you look at the third vertical panel in this window, the one with the vertical colored words, that's one of our scripting systems. And what I'd like you to note here is, isn't it pretty with all those colors? Yeah, well, anyway. Next tool we have in SWAT that's particularly interesting is this. It's called Scriptalizer. When you write your algorithms, you do it in our special language. And the problem is that the variables in a story world can't be Boolean. You can't have everybody either being the hero or the villain. You can't have everybody either loving each other or hating each other. No, you've got to use numeric values, which means you're doing numeric calculations, which means you're writing numeric scripts. And that's really hard for a lot of people to figure out. Most people don't have a feeling in their bones for how various scripts work, and that's why we made this tool. On the left panel, you can see the script being tested here. In the middle panel, you see the results as the intermediate results, and at the very top, the final result of this calculation. For the moment, let's skip all the gray and black stuff and just focus on the red stuff, because that's the actual result for this actual set of numbers. And what's neat about this is we allow you to wiggle around the input values to this script and see how they affect the output value. So here's how it works. We go up to the top input value and we wiggle it around, and you can see, well, it affects the final result a little bit, except at the really top end here, way up high, it has a huge effect, but otherwise not much of an effect. Okay, let's try the middle one. We wiggle that around somewhat, and gee, it doesn't have much effect at all, except down here there's a little bit of an effect, but otherwise it really doesn't seem to be that important. Now the bottom variable we fiddle around with. Whoa, looky there. Up at the top end there, it really has a huge effect, but otherwise, again, not much of an effect. And so this is the idea of Scriptalyzer. It allows you to get a feel for how the scripts work, and it is amazing how quickly people develop an intuitive feel for scripts after playing with this tool for a little while. Here's another tool we got. It's called Log Lizard. As the engine runs, here you are testing your story world, you're running a rehearsal, and as the engine is running, it keeps track of every single step, of every single calculation for every single decision made by every single actor in response to every single event. It remembers everything, which means if you run a rehearsal and somebody does something you didn't expect, you can go back to that precise event and look and zero in on the critical number that made it happen and say, oh my God, his pianist value was minus 0.65. No wonder he did that. Oh, I got to change the algorithm. So that turns out to be an extremely useful tool. Well, we had all 5 of these technologies fully operational in 2009, and so with great pride and joy, we released our product, we launched it to the world, and things did not quite go as we had hoped. Oops. So I spent the next 2 years working on some other projects and meditating on my many mistakes. And the one mistake that I kept coming back to over and over was the huge complexity of the technology. The Storytron technology just had too many dials to read, gauges, knobs to turn, buttons to push, levers to throw. It was just too big, too complicated. Nobody could figure it out, and so nobody could make it work. So 3 years ago, I began working on a new strategy. The first step in that strategy is well along, almost complete, and that is the creation of a new game called Cboot. We're going to release it next summer, and the purpose of this game is to make people sit up and notice and tell themselves, wow, this game does things no other game has ever done before. And then we hope they'll be interested in our technology. But before we can do anything with our technology, we have to do a little work on it, because right now the Storytron technology is a little, shall we say, excessive, overdone. We're going to take that technology and we're going to simplify it, make it cleaner, faster, easier to use. And then we're going to give it away. We're going to make it open source so that everybody can use the technology and build their own story worlds. Now, there's probably a little voice in the back of your mind whispering something along the lines of, okay, what's the hidden agenda here? And I can assure you it's not making money. We're not doing this for money. We did run a Kickstarter last summer. The Kickstarter failed, and it didn't slow us down a bit. We just kept on working because we all agreed at the outset this is not about making money. We do have a Patreon running, and it generates a couple of $100 a year. And so we are looking forward at the end of this project to having a big feast at McDonald's. Okay, so if it's not money, maybe it's fame I'm looking for. I want to be famous on the cover of magazines. No, I can tell you that's not what I want because, in fact, I've been there before. This may surprise you, but the fellow on the cover of this magazine, the guy with all that hair, that really is me. But look at the date. This is a third of a century ago. I've been down this road before. I've been famous, and yeah, it sure makes you feel good, but it doesn't make you any better. You realize that the people who admire you are admiring you for the wrong reasons, and they really don't know anything about you other than what they read in a magazine. No, that's not why I'm doing this. The real reason has to do with this fellow here. Now, I'm way ahead of him right now, but I know he's out there, and I know he's looking for me, and I know he's going to catch up with me someday. And that means that since I've been working on this project for 25 years, the time has come for me to hand this project off to a younger generation, to people with new, fresh ideas. I am confident that this technology can become the platform that is the basis for an entire industry. And this will not be an extension of the games industry. The games industry is already there. It has all of its companies, it's multi-billion-dollar industry, and it does a very good job of serving its audience. But when we come to people who want real drama in their games, well, the supply of companies is rather thin on the ground. Now, I'm hoping that by giving the technology away, we'll get all sorts of crazy people doing crazy things with it, and we will see 1,000 flowers bloom. A million weeds, perhaps, but there will be flowers among those weeds. And so my real purpose in this lecture is to recruit you, the audience, to join me in this effort. I'm doing the recruiting bit because when we start this process of converting that huge motorcycle to a bicycle, I'm going to need some help. So I'm going to need some graphic artists, some programmers, some storytellers, some web people, and some critics as well. And so I'm asking you to go to this URL, look it over, and follow up some of the leads on it. Think about it, and if you're interested in joining this project, it won't start until next summer sometime, send me an email, and we'll see how it goes. Thank you for your time.